Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. This week, we had the opportunity to talk to Peter Manniche Riber, who is the head of new tech digital learning solutions at Novo Nordisk. I found it to be a fascinating discussion on kind of what's happening with AI and learning, Stacia. What stood out to you from this conversation?
Yeah, a few things. So first and foremost, we spent a little bit of time talking about AI adoption, and he had this phrase of something that was super important, which is believability. And that seems really obvious, and he made that point too. But the fact is if the AI is giving you information or recommendations that are not believable, they're not context aware, et cetera, you're going to turn off and you're just probably not going to engage. So we talked about how that believability standard being really important to getting the AI adoption. So that was thing number one. Thing number two was around data, which was super interesting because on the one hand, he talked about the need that you don't need as much data as you think you do. Like you don't have to scrape all the systems. You can actually ask people for a lot of the data to get to what you need for adequate AI. But at the same time, he talked about how they built the system themselves. And one of the big reasons for that was they didn't want to ship all that data outside of the organization because the context and the believability were so important. So I think that was an interesting dualism of you don't need that much, but you may need enough that you don't want to ship it out. So that was pretty interesting to me. What about you, Danny?
You know what? Those really stood out to me too. The data was really interesting to me because we hear of all these vendors saying, hey, these are trained on, all of these really fancy databases and they're going to give you the very best data possible. But he was like, no. We're really specific about the context we need in order to provide this experience. And then we ask people, which is bizarre, right? We're asking people if they actually want to meet who they actually are. It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. I found that super interesting. The other thing that I found interesting is all of these new vendors are popping up to do some of the things that he created. They built it themselves. And they built it themselves for many of the reasons that you mentioned, but also it was probably more cost effective because they wanted control of how that system is going to work and run and the control, as well as there wasn't an unlimited budget. And so they built it themselves. When we asked them, hey, did you have the talent in-house to do that? He said, no. We looked elsewhere. We found people that are on the outside that could build these things for us to give us exactly what we need in them in the moment that we need them. For me, this was just a really interesting juxtaposition of this big, huge conversation that's happening about AI. And really, I guess the word that I want to use is practicality. He was super practical about how he put these things into place and made sure that they ran well.
And very specific examples. Danny and I, we didn't just now mention it, but he talked about they've got this thing called a dilemma coach to help coach people through specific challenges. And then they've got an IDP coach that's rolling out, et cetera. But you can see how they're very targeted on what are the problems we're trying to solve. How can the AI solve it? What's basically the minimal viable product that we need to produce for this? Certainly minimally viable in terms of the data, and then rolling that out more broadly. So the practicality, I completely agree.
Yeah, totally agree, Stacia. Any final thoughts before we jump in?
Yeah. One other thing, he talks about the works councils, and there's so much discussion about AI and data and works councils and the sense that, you can't work with them to get this stuff done. But he actually said, no, that's not the case at all. We started working with them very early in the process. We were very clear with them about what we were trying to achieve, particularly for employees. And much of the technology is available only to the employee. And there's even extremely clear labels. This is just for you. You don't have to scroll through 1,000 things. You can see it. And then the other thing is people could opt out, which, seems terribly obvious, but they can. And I think he said that they're at a 90% participation rate with only about 10% opting out. And so giving people that choice and that transparency was really critical to making this work in Europe.
Agree. This was a really fun conversation. He's just such a practical guy. He's also super fun to talk to. He had a really dry sense of humor. So we hope you enjoy it. If you like it, please follow the podcast and tell all your friends about it. And if you want to learn more about Red Thread Research, you can find us at redthreadresearch.com. Thanks for listening. Hey, Peter, welcome. Thanks for being on Workplace Stories.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for that. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, us too. Hey, just to start, could you briefly introduce yourself and your role and share how you first became involved with AI?
Oh, yeah. That's going to be a long story. I'll try and keep it short.
Well, I did say briefly, so.
Yeah. I work at a company called Novo Nordisk, which is a global pharmaceutical company fighting diabetes and other chronic diseases across the world, which is a nice purpose to have, going to work with every day. I live in Denmark, a small country far away, and I live in the countryside. I work remotely the most of the time. I enjoy that more than coming to the office. I've been doing that for 6.5 years in the role of head of digital learning, and now stepping into a more innovation-focused role with head of new tech as the title. It sounds so fancy, all of it. That shift in title also times very well with when we started looking into Gen AI for what it could do. We started researching this, a little bit more than 2 years ago, because we knew that something was coming, a technology that could change things to the better. I've been very passionate about exactly that for decades, that we try to step out of the era of SCORM and step into the era of actually giving people the option to learn something with technology. So yeah, that was probably a little bit harsh, but that's what it's all about. That's why we've been interested in Gen AI. And then we've done multiple prototypes. And now the last year, we've been deploying production value applications. We have one in production in the company that works called Dilemma Coach. And then we've got one that we called Individual Development Plan Coach, IDP Coach, which is in the making. And then we have actually a learning and training procurement application with Gen AI in almost ready, actually. So
Yeah.
in November. Perhaps there's lots to do.
Yeah, we're excited to talk to you about some of the details with respect to that. Before we jump into the questions with respect to AI, tell us why we should listen to you with respect to AI. And so you talked a little bit about the experimentation and that you've been passionate about it for a while, but why should people listen to you?
I made a decision 10 years ago to be thorough in everything I do. I have not always been seen as the most serious person in the world, which, thankfully, but not being as serious and trying to make a lot of fun in the workplace is also sometimes being seen as unserious, someone who's not really taking it seriously. And I take it extremely seriously. And we're very thorough in that we collect evidence for everything we do, and that we don't do anything without having data or evidence in place. And that's why I think it could be useful to listen to me, because we've actually done it. We've actually deployed stuff in big corporations. And not a lot of people or teams have been able to do that, because there's a lot of noise in a corporate situation. There's a lot of resistance to do these things with innovation and new tech. So 2 good reasons. We've tried it and we do it thoroughly.
I love it, especially the data part. This is going to be a fun discussion, I think.
So I think those are all good reasons to listen to Peter. The other thing I'll mention, just in terms of how he even got onto our podcast, and Danny, I don't know if you know this, but he's on here because somebody else recommended. They're like, oh, you got to go talk to Peter about what he's doing with AI at Novo Nordisk. And I was like, okay. So I cold outreach and was like, hey, you want to come talk to us? And 6 months later, here we finally are.
It's been a while, but that's on me.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's
I think it's both sides. But let's go ahead and jump into it. And I wanted to start the discussion a little bit about employee engagement, because you all have done quite a bit, as I understand, about personalization with employee engagement. So can you give us some examples of what you've done in the role of AI in enabling that personalization?
Yeah, definitely. We found a term in the team which we thought was completely stupid. We thought we made up a word that didn't exist, but of course the English language is so wide that it does. We call it believability. And it's been the spice that we haven't really, in every user test we've done, and we do a lot of user testing. I think we've had about 300 or 400 people, maybe on a wider scale, through some kind of user testing over the last 18 months or something like that, in various shapes and sizes for prototypes and deep interviews or small surveys, but mainly deep interviews and user tests where we could do design critique based on that. And every time, the determining factor in the feedback we got and the scores we got from people was if they couldn't recognize their own context, their own personal context in what was happening with the AI, they simply didn't believe in it. And if they didn't believe in it, they did not feel that they got the right product out of things, the right result, the right thing, the thing they came for. So we worked with that term called believability all the way through. And that's the personalization bit. That is taking data points, and it doesn't have to be a lot. I'll talk more about that if we get the time, about how much data you really need to make the Gen AI actually work pretty well, personalization. It's a lot less than you'd think. But we work with how much data do we need? How many data points do we need to put into the AI so they can build a context that people believe in? And it's different from tool to tool, depending on what it does. If you have a career plan tool where people can go in and build their own career plans, it obviously needs some context of your previous career, your current skills, the organization context, the jobs, and all sorts of data points that would inform the agent about what to choose depending on what you put in. If it's a dilemma coach tool where you go in and practice workplace dilemmas upfront, it doesn't need a lot of context, but it does need to relate to you in what department you work in, and somewhat generically tell you, because it'll never be generic when it's personal, but it's still not 100% accurate because we can't do that from a data protection perspective. But an AI is so good at making it very close to real. And that context took the numbers from really high to absolutely nothing, or the opposite, actually.
So can you give an example when you're talking about the numbers? Like, what were the numbers that were being influenced, and how did you know that this personalization was working?
All right. So personalization. What happened was we had these data points that came in and made it personal. And that was the determining factor every time. This was what we could see in the feedback that we got from respondents when we surveyed them later on with regards to their experience of actionable, and can I use this in my work, and how does it feel realistic, and do I think it made a difference? This threw the numbers up quite significantly whenever we had that context, because no one wants to read another generic AI post on LinkedIn. No one wants another generic conversation with AI or generic search results. And in a company where you have to train something that is context dependent, and everything is context dependent in a company, to your role, to the context you're in, your everyday life, your job, your work, everything. It is so important. So we had to personalize, but we also had to think about data integrity and privacy and all that stuff at the same time. So it's really a balance.
So how did you balance it? How did you decide how much information to get? How did you decide what was good enough?
Well, user testing. The thing is, I made the biggest mistake. It was just, I traveled and toured the world. I didn't, but a couple of conferences with data overviews and sheets of how much data I thought would be relevant to get in. I needed psychometric tests. I needed skills. I needed frameworks. I needed LinkedIn profiles. I needed all sorts of stuff to make it personal. Then the backend developers looked at me thinking, are you crazy? No model in the world at that point probably still could not relate to that many data points at once, and it wouldn't be able to, what do I prefer and how, and the system probably would go through, that would just be nuts to go with. So fortunately, I had a conversation in a bar in London somewhere in the afternoon with a guy called Greg Dietra. He is so smart. And this dude, he knows everything about AI and data and stuff. And he asked me a question, Peter, do you really think you need all that data? I don't think you need all that data. I think you just need to ask people. And I'm like, are you serious? Are you kidding me? No. So you're saying all these APIs, all these data points, all that, information. And he's like, yeah, but half of it, nearly half, most of it is probably outdated, the model would never be able to take it in and filter it all. So why don't you just ask people? It's much better. And he was so right. So we did that. It's crazy. People love to talk about themselves, and they give us the current context, and they talk about what's most important to them right now, which makes the AI, which is good enough with the data set it has behind it, to filter out the wrong things and get the right things in front of people. And we have an updated database of stuff that people just gave us. And it can translate it to the corporate frameworks too. That was a good, lucky meeting in London that actually made that difference. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how this works. So you're asking them in the context that they're getting the responses, or are you asking them separately and building the personas and the database behind it?
Well, kind of both, depending on the application. Okay. So in a procurement context, you would need to know what people are looking for before they go into the conversation, because that gets a conversation started fast in the right places. But if you're building a career plan, people expect that career agent to know something about you, so you don't have to repeat a lot about yourself. But what's enough? And we figured out that the title, and if we trained the agent on the job architecture framework in the company, so we have a generic set of role descriptions and all that stuff, and then some work history on people was actually more than plenty. And then we started asking people, hey, before we give you the career plan, we started building that in on the screen next to when people were chatting. You could see the career plan building up while you were chatting with it. And yeah, but it's quite easy actually to do for people who know how to do that. I don't, but the backend developers fortunately do. However, you go in and then it started asking, hey, Peter, I can see that, you've been in this role for, let's say, 3 years or whatever. It would say something like that. And what do you dream of? What are your aspirations? What do you want to go to? Because I want to build a career plan for you, but I need to know a bit more about your present day aspirations to get it to really nail it. So what kind of jobs could you be looking for? What would you think would be the right career move? Explain with your own words. And then that would relate to all that database stuff it knew about the architecture and the open job positions and the training and learning catalog. And then it would build it together. It would match. And that's where Gen AI is super good, dreaming up matches that could be relatively precise.
So this works across, I'm assuming it works across roles and departments and functions. And does it also work across sort of regions?
Yeah, works across the whole lot. People are fortunately quite simple in a good way when it comes to that. We all have dreams. We all have aspirations, and we all know how to articulate them. And we're all born into this. In the corporate setting, we know the game. We know the structure of the company. We know how our boss, who they are, how they react, what's required in a role as a senior manager, a director, a VP, whatever, right? So we also, to some extent, know the disciplines that we work with in the company. There are many in the pharmaceutical company. You could work across generic functions, but also very specialized functions. So of course, there's something there you need to take into account and train the agent on. Yeah.
Tell me why you decided to build this instead of buy it. We're seeing these things. We were just at HR Tech a couple of weeks ago, and these things are sort of popping up. Why build instead of buy?
Yeah, let me take the example of the Dilemma Coach. It's not a unique product. There's a lot of great coaches out there, a lot. I'm not going to name any vendors, but you could just Google it. You'd find quite a few where you can train these dilemmas. So we could have bought them. However, and here's the spice, we cannot share context with external companies through APIs because it's going to compromise our data. We're not going to do that. We thought about, we talked to some companies about, can we do a safe API? Can we do some, is this possible? But every model that's behind an AI in the marketplace is hosted in a place where you probably can't really reassure anyone that the data isn't being used for training somewhere. So nothing's 100% out there. That made us think about how we could build this internally. So, because we knew, back to the argument about personalization, that we needed the believability factor for this to actually work as best as possible. Our primary focus was people to learn the most they could, to get the most value out of our products as they could. And we knew we could not do that without this level of personalization. And we also knew that we needed to share some data points about our job architecture and other things that we couldn't just throw outside the firewall of the company, of course. So the risk was too big in buying it from the outside. And then we found out what it took to build it inside. And it was like, okay, let's do that. Yeah, it's not that hard. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to try and put it into perspective. I mean, just want to say, we could have bought 3 or 4 full-fledged SCORM modules for the amount of money we've spent on building the Dilemma Coach.
Dang.
Yeah, okay. I know.
Yeah. I'm super interested. So data is one of the things that makes AI work well, which is also why many organizations go outside, because their data inside is just messy and hard to use and whatever. How did you prepare your inside data or know how to access that inside data to make sure that this worked well?
We didn't. Okay. We did, let's say, I don't know if we're fortunate like that. I don't think so. I think most companies probably has this. The API we've got to the company data that we use is about name, initials, basically email address, title of what they do, and a small description of what they do, which is generically found in a standard API we can just connect to in our Dataverse inside the company. But the rest of that data that I think you're referring to, most of that is probably outdated, incomplete, and all sorts of other things where we would have to clean it. We would have to build an API. We would have to maintain the API, and we would have to govern the data set, and we would have to do risk assessments and all sorts of other things. So we thought, now that Greg told me this in a bar in London, why don't we start asking people, building our own database and get an up-to-date data set every time, instead of spending most of our resources trying to clean and connect to that data set that is incomplete and messy? It's a good question. So we found it useful to do it the opposite way, by just asking people, building our own data set and working with just enough data to make it good enough. Yeah, and we managed to do that, fortunately. This could have crashed if it didn't work, right? But it did.
But at the same time, you had to have decent job architectures and connections between the jobs and roles and development capabilities and career paths and all that, correct?
Yeah, yes, to some extent. I mean, we do lean against it, but there's also a big fallback on, or a pitfall when it comes to job architecture. So let's say the three of us worked in a learning development function in a big company, right? And we had 60 colleagues working in our learning development function globally. And we all had a similar place in the job architecture, which means that we're all described to do the same thing. There's a pretty good chance that each of us would do different things, very different things, run leadership programs, run specialist tracks, run digital, run whatever, right? Which would make our job and daily life very, very different. No job architecture in the world takes this into account. So they are super generic. Job architectures are useful when it comes to something like the dilemma coach, where it just needs your title and a little bit of spice from the architecture to make it good enough in relation to the personalization. When it comes to a career planner, it is close to useless because it does not take departure in you. It paints a very, very wide generic picture of who you could be, but we need those personalized answers from you to tell us the context. So build your own data sets on top of that. You can't do strategic workforce planning on a job architecture either, because it is so generic. It won't be useful.
That's interesting. In light of several technologies that we've seen, that's how you can. So yeah, this is a really interesting discussion because you're sort of turning like what everyone's saying on their heads. But I do think it's interesting that you're talking about, dude, why aren't you building it internally? If you need it specific to your organization, specific to your people, why are you relying on external things to tell you what your people need or how it should be done?
Yeah, but there's so many other things to that. I don't understand coding. I don't understand backend infrastructure. I know a little bit more than I did when we began, but I'm also too old to learn all these things, I guess, or maybe not too interested. However, you can control the system prompts. You can place the guardrails. You can decide on the details of the UX, the UI, the front end, how it behaves, the menu. Everything is in your control, but mainly the system prompt is, how do you guide this agent to work in the way that you want it to? We have a Novo Nordisk way of working. We have a Novo Nordisk way of coaching. We have a Novo Nordisk way of leadership. We've got a leadership skills framework that we suddenly put to use, which is more than most companies do. So that we can train the agent on and put it in the system prompt to take this into account when it provides feedback, when it provides recommendations and all that stuff. You cannot necessarily do that with an external solution because, one, you wouldn't want to share it, and two, you don't control the system prompt on what weight it puts on which things. And that is the main advantage of having it internally, is that you control that. So I'm not saying that everyone should buy or build their own thing. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I don't think we should be so afraid of it. And neither the maintenance part. Of course, it needs to be updated when models come along and all that stuff, but I mean, if you know this, if you're buying or renting something, you'll also be paying for that anyway, just to external people, right? So in this case, it was the right choice for us.
Did you have the talent internally to do this, or did you have to go find the talent to build this?
Yeah, this is also another way where I'm a little bit different. You guys invited me, so you're in for it. I don't care if people work internally or externally. We have the best team. And yes, we need to go out and find external assistance for us, but it doesn't mean that we don't have the talent internally. They're probably deployed for other projects which are prioritized differently or started or whatnot. So, of course, we looked for internal resources first. I mean, there are only brilliant people working in Novo Nordisk, and especially in IT. We could have found them internally, but they weren't available. So we found it externally. I'm just looking at, can we get someone in who's really good at back-end coding and also great and fun people to work with? Can we get someone in to do front end and UI, UX and user testing who are also great people and fun to work with and skilled at what they do? Then great.
And the guy at the bar, did he get to be a part of this project?
Nope. But yeah, I don't think Greg would have had a lot of fun here. But you guys need to go and find Greg Dieter on LinkedIn or somewhere else in a bar in London. I mean, I think the bar was my idea, actually, that we had to go and grab a beer at Learning Tech at some point in the afternoon or whatnot. It wasn't a big old bar, puckball splash. It was just a beer and a good talk over a couple of hours. Yeah, I would love to work with him someday. He is beyond brilliant. But he wasn't part of this, unfortunately, no.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data limitations, because you have referenced them a few times, obviously being a European company. Can you talk about how you all managed the works councils and all those restrictions in doing this?
That's a funny thing, isn't it? Because everyone's like, when you say workers' council and you say data privacy, everyone's like, oh no. Well, what do? It's a fear factor. And we decided to tackle that a little bit differently. So we started, there's no one I like to work more with than the lawyers, the privacy lawyers, because all of them are just amazing people who wants to do the right thing and wants to protect people's rights and data. And it's been our primary focus to make sure that people can trust this product and they feel they can trust it when they use it. And there are multiple ways we went about it. We went to talk to the workers' councils quite early, and with the lawyers were probably the first people we called to make sure that one was very informed about what the legislation says, the EU Act and the GDPR regulations and other ethical aspects of AI, because it's super important in my experience and also opinion. So we started very early to engage with them so that they knew that we wanted to help people with these technologies. That was our interest. And we were very willing to listen to any concerns they have and also adapt and some of the great alterations that they would suggest to the products that we could make it safe. So that we started early, got in early, started dialogue and got the approval when we deployed in Germany. And I think we have a wonderful collaboration with the Workers' Council and also the lawyers on these things. So I think it's a matter of having an interest in reading up on the legislation. And then there's the other aspect of that is how do we inform people about the safety and security in the application? We do not give people a text that they can't read because they need binoculars to read it, and the 875 partners that they can then click OK to and then just move on. We went with 3 screenshots where people with very large font, I think the UX guy, he's still a little bit annoyed with that because it doesn't look amazing, but it looks so that you can read it. This is what the data is used for. Are you okay with that? Okay. This, boom, boom, boom. And you can always, in the bottom, it's so brilliant. It says, this space is for you only. Read about the data privacy here. That's the UX guy again. He's amazing. He's a Norwegian guy. And his sentences are just razor sharp. So what we really, really wanted to underline was that people could feel safe. And we measured this across the prototypes and went from a percentage at about 60% who felt safe to now being at about 88, 89, something like percent of people who definitely feel safe. And about 10%, I think 10, 15%. Yeah, then we're above 100. I think it's 85 who are safe and 15% who feel maybe, but close to no one that feels unsafe when going and using the application. And that is exactly where we need to be. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. We have a ton of other questions, but I think maybe now would be a good time to do a quick break, get to know you a little bit more. Peter, are you game?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I don't know, but I think so.
So I'm going to lead in and ask you first question, which is, what's your superpower?
Yeah, I think what I'm really, really good at is mitigating. Slam dunks, yeah, I'm pretty tall. No, I think mitigation, it's become my superpower, is to still be super energetic, but also go into senior stakeholder meetings and mitigate and say, hey, don't worry, it's going to be all right, because boom, 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 boom. Find the right people, get the funding sorted, and make people trust it, while also keeping momentum. And I think that's the superpower that I have in a corporate sense. I think we can prove that by having deployed something. Yeah, but we've actually deployed something. I'm so super proud of that. We're deploying cutting-edge stuff in a corporate with more than 80,000 people employed. I don't think that happens in a lot of places. I feel arrogant when saying it, but I feel also super proud about it. I think that's a small percentage to that is the superpower of actually making sure that we've got the senior buy-in and they trust us. Yeah.
Second question. What's your stage name?
Oh, the stage name. Yes. Oh, God. I should pick something.
What's your stage name?
Yeah. I need one of those because I play the drums. Yeah. I'm not very good at it. But when I have to label all my stuff in where we practice and rehearse, I do it with this Dymo, it's called, where you can print out the little labels. And I call it Pete Machine. Pete Machine, because Peter Manniche, it's just easier with Pete Machine. So I think, and it also I'm kind of a machine sometimes when it comes to just powering through. I think I'd pick that Pete Machine.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, as a drummer too, right? You're like the steady drum, literally drum beat. So that's
also
like
a machine, isn't it?
Sense.
Yeah. Timing.
All right. Final lightning round question has to do with music and movies. And it's, what movie has the best soundtrack?
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go a little bit sideways. Maybe you guys will find it ridiculous. There is an American movie called Hot Rod. It is a spoof of Evel Knievel kind of stuff. And you'd love this. I mean, yeah, it is because it is with a lot of Europe songs on it and a stadium rock kind of thing. So Europe, they're only kind of known for one song, right? The Final Countdown. But their catalog is much wider than that. And the texts, the lyrics from those songs are amazing. They're so simple. And yeah, that's the best soundtrack in my mind. That would be Hot Rod.
Okay, I just found it on Apple Music, and I'm going to listen to this evening. Danger on the Track, Never.
Danger
Charity,
on the Track.
Street Luge. You're the Voice, Cool Beans, Dave on Acid.
Yeah.
Danny, what would yours be? I know we don't usually ask, but
Grosse Point Blank. It's my favorite movie. It's this dark comedy about Michigan, and it has the best 80s, 90s soundtrack. It's awesome.
That's kind of the same ballpark. Yeah.
I'm going to say Forrest Gump, I think.
Okay, that's a beautiful one. That's a good one, too.
Yeah.
True.
Heartwarming.
Oh.
No, but you're right, because the music is so versatile. There's a lot of different, I get that. It's a good choice. Better choice than Hot Rod.
It is a good choice.
No. We're not judging choices here.
Well.
That is a fine choice, Peter. Fine choice. So, Peter, we've already talked about one of your coaches, the Dilemma Engine, and how it helped your workforce sort of develop and grow. I'm really interested also in your IDP Coach, partly because it takes a fairly traditional idea and turns it on its head. So I would love for you to explain a little bit about that, how it came to be and what it does.
Yeah, question. It kind of originated from we have some issues with managers, and I think every company in the world has this, spending, prioritizing their time and having the bandwidth to really coach people to get a massive career in the company. And also there is a scaling issue when it comes to what regions, what part of the company outside HQ will actually get this opportunity. And what about fairness? And what about availability and accessibility of these things to I'm all about equality. And I think this actually does a lot for that. However, any manager, however good they are and big-brained they are, will never have the bandwidth to oversee what kind of career opportunities do we have across the company at what time. They would never have the overview of even just a couple of employees and all their career and what their choices were and what their jobs were and skills are and all that stuff, and match that together in a second, like Gen AI can do. It comes down to training, it comes down to jobs, it comes down to short-term opportunities, it comes down to all sorts of things that you could imagine doing where you could learn something or develop as a person inside the company. So AI is just a bigger brain when it comes to that. It can handle a lot bigger databases. It is somewhat, I would say, maybe less biased. That is a stretch to say because AI is super biased, but so are people. That's a whole different discussion that I don't want to go into right now. But the thing about the bandwidth and giving people an opportunity across the company to match their skills and careers with what's there and available and giving them that outside was just, that is what it's all about. That's what we're trying to do, to give everyone the chance of a fantastic career.
One of the things we've talked about in our research with managers is that providing these types of tools can actually increase manager effectiveness. We think it's for two reasons. One is that it takes some of the burden off of managers for having to, figure out the answer to what should be done in terms of career development. But two, because the employees had an opportunity to kind of see the base resources and to form an opinion of their own, the conversation with the manager also improves in quality. Did you find that with this coach?
It's not been deployed yet, so I don't know. But we found it in all the prototype research that we've done. Yes, absolutely underlines both of those points. And I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It makes good sense, doesn't it? Because just pure logic tells you that that is a difficult task as a manager to do that and to see all that. And you have a lot to do in your management role that's not about that. So prioritizing just that task is probably difficult for a lot of people.
Cool. I know we're getting short on time, so I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about one of my favorite subjects, being strategic workforce planning. And I want to understand, how did AI play into strategic workforce planning for you all? And what type of advice would you give to others who are trying to replicate what you've done?
Yeah, so I just want to underline that it hasn't played a role yet, but potentially definitely will. And we're talking a lot about it. So I don't know if people want to take my advice for it, but I do have some, insights or advice that I probably pass on, which is kind of logic again. And just recall that I only have a bachelor's degree, so I don't know how many would listen to this. However, if you have terrible data, if we have terrible data to work from, you're not going to get a great result from any strategic workforce exercise, even with Gen AI. It's not going to fix it. Gen AI is not going to fix it if you don't have the data set. So if you don't know what skills people have, what career dreams people have, what strategies, do you know how many strategy documents are worked on every year, uploaded on a SharePoint page, where a very limited crowd goes in and reads up on this and, goes into detail about how they could put that into effect. It's probably a pretty significant amount of both PowerPoint slides and money. So why don't we put that to use and actually just take an example of you want to do an organizational restructure. How do you do that? Because you see there's some market differentiation that's happening somewhere. You need to do something different. So that's the analysis. How do you structure your organization to fit that? So what do you need to do strategically? What resources do you have, skills and all that stuff that you can deploy to achieve that strategy? And then you have Gen AI to dream up scenarios where that could actually come true with what you have in store. It's pretty simple in my mind, but those data sets are just not available inside companies. So you'd have to build that. And again, back to Greg's point, ask people about a lot of that, and then take those strategy documents, contextualize the departments, and make some kind of structured data set out of that. And you can use Gen AI to do that too. So do the analysis, do the summaries, do the matching, all that stuff. So you can do some different agentic stuff there, where you'd have some agents run over the strategies, you'd have some agents run over the database of people and skills and jobs and whatever you have right now. And then you'd have an engine dreaming up a new reality, which is the strategic workforce planning scenario planner that would actually give you a well-informed guess about how you could restructure to fulfill your strategy. That would be my take.
And you've broken up a little bit for me, so I'm just going to ask a follow-on question. If you already said it, just strike it for me. So in terms of kind of this approach, have you all done this completely yourselves, or is this kind of what you see as the future of doing this type of work?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the second. So it is what I see as being the future. We haven't done it yet with us. And I don't know of any organizations that really did that yet. So I hope it's going to happen. And I hope that this kind of application would only work across a number of applications that you could use. The career coach could be very closely connected with something like that. The skills assessment AI that we would love to do too, where people get skills assessed in an AI engine too. Yeah, let's connect the agents and then do all these exercises in that same environment across. Maybe ask me in 10 years and we'll see. But,
I think we're going to see it sooner than that.
I hope so.
I hope so. Hey, Peter, as we're wrapping up, what's one big piece of advice you have for L&D departments and others that are trying to get started with AI?
I kind of feel like it's about time that people in L&D departments across the corporate space start experimenting. And I'm not talking about experimenting in the way of just using Copilot or ChatGPT to get, summaries or whatever you're doing in ChatGPT these days. You can do experiments in ChatGPT, but you have to do it with hypotheses. You have to do it with your own prompts. You have to start working with it. People find it in some way. I think I've been down this track quite a bit with things I've done, like virtual reality. We did augmented reality back in the day. Then we did data and we did personalization with marketing. And what I get a lot is people are super interested, but they don't really get started on these things. And I think it's important to talk about that I don't have a college education. I don't have a college degree. I've got a bachelor's degree. Does that count in something completely different? I never made it to the master's. I don't know anything about data, algorithms, AI, in like the details of those things. I don't have a PhD in either of those things. I don't have the talent for either of those things either. But I can do it. And then everyone else should also be able to do it if they want to. So instead of talking about Gen AI and going to conferences and being very interested in Gen AI or agentic AI, just start doing it with experiments. If I can do it, then all of you guys, everyone else in the world can do it. So I just want to how do you say that? I want to eliminate the argument that it takes an army, an extensive budget, and super brains to do these things. It doesn't. Yeah.
Peter, thanks for being with us. This has been really great. I think you've sort of opened my eyes to maybe a different way to think about AI, maybe an untethered version of AI that most organizations aren't thinking about right now, which is awesome. We always end the podcast with the same question. And the question is what we call the purpose question. And that question is, why do you do the work that you do?
Yeah. Oh, what a good question. So I do it because I am so passionate about learning out of experience of what's not working. And it's a terrible thing. I used to be a very cynical dude. Now I'm old, so less cynical and more pragmatic. But I really want to get rid of what everyone can see is not working in the world of learning and training, especially digitally. And I want us to do better. And that is why I'm doing it. I want us to do better. I want to be the world champion of what I do, because I can't become a world champion as an athlete in any way, and it's too late. But maybe I can still achieve it here. And that doesn't mean that I am trying to push other people aside. It means I want to do it as a community. But I'm so passionate about that. I'm so passionate about cleaning up all the stuff we shouldn't have done and then starting in a fresh way with the digital stuff that can be really good if we do the right way.
I love that answer so much. Thank you so much for being with us, Peter.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.
It's been so fun.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.